Rhiannon, and I'm going to be talking today about podcasts. For those of you that don't know, a podcast is like a radio program. They can have lots of people talking, they can just be one person, and usually it's just the audio that you hear. Sometimes people do record them and they'll have videos, but there's not really a lot going on. It's usually just about what's being spoken about. So they can be well structured, they can have themes in them. I first got into podcasts, like many other people, when I had to have a really long commute to work, and I was just sick of listening to the same 20 songs. So I started discovering all different types of podcasts, and there's so many types, and I'm going to talk about a few of my favourites today. But I really encourage everyone to have a look and see what's out there. I'm talking about my favourite ones today, but there's so many about sports, and there's really educational ones that are like crime, murder mysteries, ones that will have lots of celebrities or favourite artists talking about things that you wouldn't normally expect them to talk about. So I think they are a really great way to connect with people that you like. My notes. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called Intrigue Tunnel 29. So this is a podcast that you can find for free on BBC Sounds, and it's about uni students who escaped from East Germany when the Berlin Wall was being put up, and then they club together because lots of their friends and family are still stuck on the side that's really oppressive, and they build a tunnel underneath the Berlin Wall, and they nearly get found out a few times, and the tunnel collapses and they have to build a new one, and it's real accounts from the guy who actually was there and built it, and they have some actors' voices as well. So that was a really educational podcast, and it's probably one of my favourites because I learned so much, and it really paints a picture of what it was like to live in Berlin at that time. Another podcast that I've started listening to recently is called Great Lives, which is about people who did amazing things in history but aren't really well known. So sometimes they will have celebrities talking about who inspired them. So musicians will talk about who inspired them, or they'll have people talking about artists that were really hard done by, or nurses who overcome challenges to do the profession they wanted to do. So people in the past that have lived great lives. One that my mum likes to listen to, and I find quite nice to kind of listen to, and you kind of get the social aspect from it, is called Table Manners with Jessie, Ware. So Jessie, Ware and her mum will cook up a really nice meal, and they'll invite a celebrity round, and they kind of just talk quite freely. Sometimes they will kind of talk about what food they like to eat and food when they were growing up, and it just kind of centres around the dinner table and just dinner table talk, which is really nice, and they have some really amazing guests on there. Her mum's really funny as well. Another one that I really like to go back to is called Happy Place, which is hosted by Ferne, and it's her happy place. She talks about things that make her happy. She's got amazing guests on there. She knows a lot of celebrities obviously in her line of work. She gets a lot of musicians on there, and a lot of people that have done amazing things that you don't necessarily know about, and talking about their lives, and that podcast has been going on for a really long time. There's a lot of episodes that are quite nice to catch up on. One that Ferne mentioned in one of her recent podcasts is a podcast called GABA, and it's like relaxation and meditation, and the guy has got a really creamy voice. It's just so sweet and ear caramel, and really soothing, and sometimes they'll have guided meditation, sometimes it will just be nice stories, but there's really nice background music, and they're quite short, so it's nothing too long that you have to commit to if you haven't got the time. And then I'm going to talk about some of the podcasts that I like to listen to because it makes me feel like I'm with my friends. So there's one by two best friends in America called The Black New York, and they just talk about what it's like living in New York. They talk about things that are relevant to them. They also listen to people's recommendations, so they started their podcast about this time last year, and they're really engaging with all the people that listen to them, and they like to hear feedback and take recommendations for themes and get people's advice on there. My absolute favourite podcast that I listen to pretty much every week is called The Receipts Podcast. Again, similar to The Black New York, it's three best friends or three good friends talking about dilemmas. They get guest celebrities on sometimes, but the main premise of their show is that it's like an agony aunt, and people send in their dilemmas with their relationships, situations, just things that need unpacking, and they will help them unpack that in a really funny and down-to-earth way, and some of their advice is really good. A recent podcast that's just started this year in January is called This City by Clara Amfo. She started this podcast near the end of January, and she's already had some amazing guests on there, and it's to do with just living in London and city life, and she gets a lot of guests who born and bred in London and that have given a lot to music and arts in London. So those are some of my favourites. I think we're going to try and put some links in the bottom of the video so you can find these. But for those of you that don't know where to find podcasts, Podbean is a really great free site where you can get a lot of these podcasts. I think pretty much all of them you can find. There's some podcasts that are made exclusively by Apple Music or exclusively by Spotify, but Podbean is kind of the most broad platform for finding podcasts. It's really easy to use. BBC Sounds is also a free one, and all of these you can download, so if you're going on a long journey, you don't have to be connected to Wi-Fi or have your data on to listen to them.
So can I just ask you a question? So somebody who's very new to podcasts, so just to say, Rhiannon kindly invited me into the world of podcasts yesterday. So personally, I get really overwhelmed. I'm a bit dyspraxic. I'm quite sensitive, defensive. So I've been finding the television a bit too much. Sometimes we just need a break from our eyes and just to sit down. So for me, last night, listening to, is it GABA? Is that the one? GABA, sorry. See, GABA last night was really amazing. It was like a really soft voice and some music in the background. Do you have to have, what equipment do you need? So for a novice like me, I have a phone that is not an iPhone. It's a particular brand. So what do you do to find this Podbean? How would you find it? Can you find it if you just got a laptop or a computer?
I'm not sure, but I would say that if I was using my laptop or computer, YouTube would usually be the first thing I go to, but YouTube again has adverts and can be a bit overwhelming because of the amount of content on there. So if you go to the App Store or wherever you download apps on your phone or your device, and type in Podbean, I'm pretty sure that you can find it there. And I think it's a good question if it's available on laptops, but I think it should be.
Okay, so something to look at. So we're going to put some links underneath. So just in terms of your perception of this, so we're talking about the 5 ways of well-being at the moment, or the 5 routes to well-being even, as part of Mental Health Week. So in terms of how you can access something like a podcast, what can that do for you? Where would you say that is on there, and why?
So the one I first talked about the tunnels that they dug in Berlin, that was really educational for me, and it really painted a picture of living, what it was like to live in Berlin at that time when the Berlin Wall was up, and there was that real separation, and even families would be divided, and they couldn't talk to each other. They had no access to media, so that was a really educational podcast, and I learned a lot from that. The podcast that I mentioned towards the end, that it's like you're the extra person in the conversation. They make jokes and you laugh with them, and for me it gives that social element of just listening to normal conversation and just feeling part of that. And they make in jokes, and you're in on the joke, and it's just having that social connection that feels pretty real and it's there whenever you need it.
I mean, I've loved it. In just one day, listening to podcasts as opposed to maybe the radio or maybe a CD or something that your normal go-to, it's just been amazing. So I think, like from what you're saying, sort of connecting with others in terms of feeling that you can connect with others, and also learning. But also it sounds as though some of like the podcasts about the family in Berlin, a little bit about building resilience, really, because sometimes I think we don't realise with our mental health, if we're feeling low in mood or if we're feeling a bit anxious, it's nice just to have a distraction sometimes, isn't it, and listen to somebody else's perspective.
Absolutely, yeah, I think they're really inspirational. The podcast called Great Lives, where you hear about people in history that did amazing things that aren't really that well known and recognised. It's so inspirational to hear how, against all odds, that they do these amazing things. And there was one about the first woman surgeon, and how she became to, how she fought to get that place, and they against all odds she became a surgeon. And one's about musicians and the hardships that people go through. So I think that can be really inspiring, especially the times we're living in now, to hear really inspiring stories. It really helps to motivate me.
Oh, thank you so much, Ferne. Really appreciate you sharing what podcasts can do for people, because I think some of us that don't know, the words pod and cast, for me, it was just completely, didn't understand it at all. I thought it was something that only young people could do. I didn't realise you can download them, so you don't need your data or your Wi-Fi, so you can actually, a bit like taking a book out of the library, I suppose, and plonking it in your bag, you can pop it onto your device or your phone, you can listen to it. And actually sometimes I think if you're anxious as well, if you're on, say, public transport and it's busy and you just need to get away from that, to actually be able to listen to people talking as if they're talking to you.
That's the main reason, is when I started doing these long commutes, and there'd be times I'd literally be bursting out laughing on a full train and everyone's looking at me. But you go into a complete different world, and I know that music can really offer that for some people, but to be able to have that social connection, and podcasts can be anything from 10 minutes long to an hour and a half long, and it just depends what the content is, and you can really dip in and out of what you feel you want and what you need at the time.
It's really opened my eyes to what's out there. I mean, obviously we're creating these videos and for the YouTube channel and for Mental Health Week, and to grow this and to support people, but oh wow, I'm just so amazed. I definitely now understand podcasts, and we've actually started to set up our own channel for Roots to Wellbeing, so we're going to, hopefully by the time you see this video, there should be some podcasts in there.
There'll be some Roots to Wellbeing podcasts, yeah, and I'll talk about them.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, really appreciate you, thank you so much.
Thank you.